Hey everyone, and welcome to Screams After Midnight. I am Peter, that is Tim, and we talk about horror movies here. I'm adjusting my pop shields here as I talk because I forgot to do it first. But yeah, we talk about horror movies, and on this episode we are going to talk about From a House on Willow Street, which is a new film. It is about a team of thieves who kidnap this girl from a rich family with the intention of blackmailing her parents into handing over some diamonds that they know they have. The father specifically, his line of work leads to all that kind of thing. But they get more than the bargain for it, and the girl turns out to be possessed slash evil slash something's going on. But the thieves, the kidnappers are now going to be the victims. It's kind of your typical setup, and yeah, we're going to get into it. So first things first, I guess, Tim. Obviously, we'll start spoiler free. I need to give that preface. Spoiler free first. We'll warn you before we go into spoilers. But there we go. So Tim. Mm-hmm. I already know the answer to this because you could not wait to let me know how you felt yesterday. But I'm going to ask you, for the sake of the audience who need to get your initial thoughts and feelings out in the open. Did you enjoy From a House on Willow Street?
Ooh, heavens no.
Heavens.
No, I got fancy for a second. No, I really did not enjoy this. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen. We've watched worse movies this year even, but there really was not a lot that I liked in this.
Fair. There's just a couple of movies we watched this year that you could probably put in the running for the worst of all time.
Yeah, there's some that are like just till the end of this podcast or however many episodes we do that it'll be hard to beat. But
yeah, although I'm sure the movie industry is going to give it a jolly good try.
Oh yeah,
they're going to try their damnedest. Tim, on the other hand, does not know how I feel about this film. I have kept my cards close to my chest. I like to not let Tim know how I feel until we're on air, as it were.
Sometimes, usually we don't talk about it too much beforehand, but sometimes I'll see you tweet about it or you might post something, so I get a little bit of an inkling. But this, I'm really not sure because, I haven't seen you say anything, and also it kind of reminded me of another movie that we disagreed upon. So I'm really not sure where you're going to land on this.
I'm curious to hear what that movie that you think this compares to is, because I'm not really sure what it is.
Okay.
But I'll find out in a minute. You are absolutely insane, Tim. You're insane to think that I might like this.
Okay.
Because Jesus Christ, it was shit. What are you on?
For a second there, I thought you were gonna say like I'm insane because you loved it. I was like, oh god.
I know. I did that intentionally, Tim. That was. I was building a bit of suspense for you. I was pulling the rug out from under you. But no, this wasn't very good. Like you said, it's not the worst thing ever. We definitely have watched worse things this year. Probably a good half dozen things that were worse, honestly, which lets you know how her year's been. I think the worst thing about this movie, though, is the fact that I can see the good movie in there. I can see some good ideas.
Yeah, certainly.
It's just the execution is very lacking. Some of the acting is particularly bad. The main girl, actually, Sharni Vinson, who plays Hazel, she's like the head kidnapper. She was the main girl in You're Next, and she was good in that. So I know she's not necessarily a bad actress. And she's not the worst in this either, by any means. There's a guy, his name's Mark. He's like they all have like things from the past. He's got like a daughter that he's got his dark past about, and he's like their sort of like he's always on the computer monitors. He's always watching the security camera. So I think he's like the techie guy. Although we don't get a whole lot of information to really support that beyond him just looking at the monitors a lot. But he is especially bad. Like every line that came out of his mouth sounded like someone who had never acted before trying to be an actor. It was kind of terrible, and it really took me out of every single time he spoke. Every scene he was in, every time he spoke, it was like, all right, okay. The illusion of this being a reality shattered.
I wonder if that's a little bit of a disconnect because you said this was we're talking about a little bit before we started recording, but you said this is from the Netherlands, right?
The Netherlands is listed as its original country, so it very well could be that some of the actors' English isn't their first language. So that very well could be the reason for it sounding so off. But the end result, though, is that it's off-putting. It doesn't feel right. It feels unnatural.
Now, I'm not sure if you're gonna agree with one of my big points here, and maybe it's just a weird thing I had, but I feel like this movie was just like trying really hard to be cool, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't know, I feel like there were so many scenes that just felt like, you know, you could almost see the director being like, oh, it's gonna be really cool, like, oh man, yeah, now we're gonna do this, oh man, it's gonna be like so like metal and dark and twisted, and you know what I mean. I don't know, it's one thing that I couldn't like help thinking of throughout the whole movie.
I that thought never had occurred to me, especially, but I don't necessarily disagree with it.
Yeah.
It's kind of, because I feel like the director was really trying, which is kind of the sad part here, is that I don't necessarily look at this and go, oh, this is some like work for hire who's come in who's been hired to make this movie. I feel like there was someone here who really actually wanted to make a good movie, and almost for a couple of scenes, kind of like you can see what he was trying to do, and you get what he was going for. But there's just some fundamental things that aren't working. The big one for me, the first big thing, is the pacing is all over the place. The start of the movie rushes past all of the setup, and we're already into the main plot, and it's like, why do I care about any of these characters? You've not given me any reasons. And it just it rushes through it. I couldn't believe how quickly it was moving at the start.
Yeah, and it feels so much longer than it really is, because it's only like 90-ish minutes or so. But halfway through the movie, I thought like, oh well, we're ramping up towards the end. Like, this has to be it, right? And then I looked, and I was only halfway through. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, it's really been going by just like that. All right.
Yeah. Because I think the other problem with that is, though, is that once the movie does actually get going, it kind of just like turns into a series of very repetitious scenes of characters wandering around in the dark with their flashlights, and a scare will happen. Not ghosts, but like basically the possession makes them see things, so there'll be like a scare of something from their past or something personal to them, and it'll be a jump scare. And I knew the movie was I was going to have a rough time with this movie, because I didn't mind the opening as much as I thought it was moving a bit too fast. Like, oh no, I like this setup. It's kind of a little bit of Don't Breathe, a little bit of The Collector kind of thing, if you're into those type of plots where you've got these criminals doing something, and they're not necessarily evil people, but like they're going to be in this position where it flips it around on them. That's kind of the whole idea of the movie. And I was fine with it at the start. I couldn't believe how quickly they got the girl, though, and how quickly they had her back in their base.
Yeah.
But then once after we get to that point, the first time where I was like, oh god, this might be bad. We followed one of the male characters as he was away to check something, and we have this little scene where he's like wandering around in the dark, and it's kind of creepy, whatever. There's some steam and stuff. They're in like an old factory, and there's like smoke and stuff coming from the pipes and whatever. And
I know exactly what
we have this really badly timed jump scare where this like ghostly presence appears right behind him, and it's right at the end of the scene. And the worst part about it is that the scene cuts away super quick. You have barely time to process that anything just happened, and it just feels poorly paced. It feels like the editor and the director didn't know how long to let this sit, and it was weird. It was like the timing was off, and that was when I got really worried, because I was like, if you can't time the scare properly, if there's no sense of timing, then a lot of this movie is going to be really rough to get through, and it was. And the worst part about it, I think, is that it just became really boring, because I felt like half the movie, the middle chunk especially, was people wandering. They kept getting split up, and they kept wandering around in the dark in the same building or outside in the woods near the building, and it was just wandering around until a jump scare happens, and that was that on repeat. I just kept doing that over and over again, and I felt like it wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, and then that scene in particular kind of brings me to another big complaint I had, which, funny enough, it kind of reminded me of like the opposite of what we were saying about the movie we did last week, The Void. Whereas The Void, we felt like we could see a lot of the like homages or like inspirations and stuff from it. Whereas this movie, I feel like there's some stuff that seemed like blatant ripoffs to me. Like that scene that you were just mentioning at the start of it, it felt super like a ripoff of Lights Out. Like it starts with him turning the lights off, and then he sees like a dark figure there. Then he turns it on again real quick, and it's gone.
Yeah,
and
I see what you mean.
Even like, and you mentioned it earlier. Like, it's not like you can never not.
To the movie's credit, at least in that scenario, I think Lights Out was too recent for it to be actually ripping that one off. Like this movie went to festivals like months ago. Lights Out came out last summer. Like, it's just they couldn't have made it in that time. So I just want to, just in case anyone brings you up on that point, like, I don't think it's physically possible that they were ripping off that specific one.
I don't know. I'll believe it, and when I get some production notes to show exactly when they started.
Okay, sure. Tim thinks that the filmmakers were time traveling to steal things from other films, but they never actually beat the film. If you were going to steal from a movie, you might as well steal from one that wasn't going to be out by the time yours came out, surely.
True.
This is a weird tangent to go on, but you would steal from something that wasn't even going to be known about when you came out, and that way you're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I mean, regardless, then let's say they didn't actively, or intentionally rip stuff off, and then it's still pretty unfortunate that there was a lot of stuff that I could see, like, oh well, this movie did that better, or this.
Honestly, Tim, I think what you just described though was just such a generic scare. Like you're thinking of Lights Out because that was the thing that did it probably like the most well recently, the most effectively, but it's not like a. Like I think the point is that this movie's very derivative of like traditional scares, but without doing it the right timing, and that's why I think it doesn't work most of the time. Is that the timing on all this stuff it just isn't there.
Yeah, like nothing about it really stood out as original or unique.
Which even that would be fine though. Like it can be unoriginal and ununique as long as it's entertaining or suspenseful, and it wasn't.
Right.
It just kind of, like I say, I was bored throughout most of it. I was waiting for it to end after the first 20 minutes.
Yeah.
As soon as I see what the quality of the scares was going to be like, I immediately kind of lost interest, and the movie never recovered for me from there. And then another big problem with the movie is that, so the movie's about them having this possessed girl, but I feel like they forget there's a possessed girl in the movie for like large chunks of time. Like it's really just about them like being scared in the dark for large portions of the movie. And the one time it does start to do something interesting, I was like, okay, this is a cool idea, but the movie's already flopped the execution of it, so I'm not with you at this point. It's a shame. It's a real shame because I can't really talk about what I like about it until the spoilers, or at least because it is all kind of like heavy plot stuff. But yeah, I will say this: I thought it was really weird that they don't mention. This is like a small thing, but it's really weird to me, given that the name of the movie is based about the street, right, where the house is. I thought it was really weird at the start of the movie. At no point when they're, because it opens with a scene of them setting up the plan, like they're all the thieves or the kidnappers are in their hideout, and they're setting up the plan and talking about what they need to do, when they need to do it by. At no point did anyone say the address of where they were going, and I thought that was really strange. I feel like if you're naming your movie after the location of where this is happening, it seems really strange to me that you do not set that up at the start of the movie by pointing out specifically where you're going.
Yeah.
It didn't matter at the start of the movie. It wasn't brought up. It was weird.
Yeah, that is odd. Or like, I don't know, like at least if some point if you had, something where like a character starts telling a story and then, they're like, and that happened on the house at Willow Street, or even like, something stupid like that to give kind of okay.
That's the thing though, it does that later on, but it does it after it tries to like make it important. It's weird, like
I don't even really recall.
Again, not talking about them not building up suspense. Like you would do that. It's like, because as an audience, let's say you hadn't even seen a trailer, all you've seen is the title of the movie, right?
Yeah.
You go into the movie, you sit down, and the kidnappers are, I keep calling them thieves. I mean, they're trying to steal something, I guess, but they're kidnappers. They're trying to kidnap the girl, right? And they're setting all this stuff up. The one thing that would make you go, oh, right, things are getting going, is when they say, where are we going again? And go, 75 Willow Street. And you go, oh, that's the name of the movie. Like, it's going down there. Like that could be a way to, bring the audience into the movie, and it's just weird that they don't mention it. It's such a strange choice. And it almost made me think that they didn't name that, like the title was different when they were shooting it. Like they decided the title after they shot it.
I forget. Do you even see the title at the beginning?
No, it's at the end.
Was it one of the ones at the end?
It's at the end.
Okay,
it ends in the title screen.
I do specifically remember the logo in the beginning because that put me off kind of right away.
I did not remember the logo in the beginning.
I just thought it was so stupid. It's called Fat Cigar, and it was like a gold skeleton.
Okay.
Or something. And I think maybe that was at the first point where I was like, they seem like they're trying kind of hard.
Is that better or worse than there's a Korean? I think it's Korean anyway, because I at least seen it on a few Korean movies. There's a Korean production company called Toilet Pictures. Is that better or worse than Toilet Pictures?
I think I like Toilet Pictures better. At least that sounds like they have a little bit of humility, a little bit of sense of humor.
And not try to be cool. It's like, what is the most uncool thing we can call our company? Toilet Pictures. Of course that appeals to you.
And make it sound like I have a toilet fetish.
But yeah, so the characters are kind of nothing. Like I say, it rushes through the opening so much is we never get a time to really learn who the characters are beyond they're criminals, and like one of them has to be in court by a certain date, which is why they have to pull off this job by a certain date, and that's literally all we get. We get no sense of who they are, to the point where like they start bringing in elements of their past, like haunt them, as it were. Like they have to introduce those elements right before it starts to happen. We find out that Mark's got a daughter because he puts a little picture of his daughter up, right, like a scene before he starts like hearing the voice of his daughter. Or we start like we don't even know about the other guy's mother being like a cow until after he's already heard like the ghost of his mother talking to him, or it's not really the ghost, it's a hallucination caused by the demon or whatever. But it's just it keeps just shoehorning in stuff like really quickly without properly seeing it. It's really, really bad. Same with the overall mythology of the possession, which we'll get to in spoilers, but it just so yeah, I didn't like it. I didn't like it. Like I thought this plot had some potential, but it executed. It chose to focus on all the wrong things. The pacing wasn't there. Some of the acting was terrible, and it ended on such a down whimper of an ending that it just. Fine, I guess. This is what we were going with this. Like, instead of doing something interesting with the ending, it went for this more over-the-top thing that involves CG, which we'll talk about in spoilers.
That's something I was going to bring up, too. The CG was pretty bad.
I don't even care if it was good or bad. I just care that it was out of play. Like, in this type of plot, I think what makes this type of plot interesting is the psychology of it. You know, embrace your low budget. Like, do it all so that it's what you're not seeing. Like, have you question if things are actually happening, but it plays it so straight to the point when there's CG things coming out of people's mouths. It's just like, this is goofy and shit.
Yeah, there's probably a much better, like, subtler way to do this movie where, you don't have as many, jump scares and CGI crap going on.
Do you know what? I'll take a jump scare. I'll take a good jump scare if you time it right. I can take a jump scare. It's fine, but none of them work. None of them work in this. So no, and I will say, going back again to not giving a shit about any of the characters because we don't get enough of any of them to actually give a shit. You know, at some points, like we're supposed to care when something happens to one of them, or when one of them makes a choice, or something like that towards the end, and it's just kind of like, I don't care. This moment means nothing to me, so it's a real shame. All right, let's get into some spoilers then, because there's a few key points I want to talk about. All right, so full spoilers then from this point on for From a House on Willow Street. So, just to piggyback on that last comment I made. So the boyfriend character, the blondie, Aid, he sacrifices himself to let Hazel, who's the main female kidnapper, go. He's like, oh, no, you go. You know, at this point, the demon's already possessed the other two guys, and the girl herself, Catherine's coming at her. Tim, stop playing with your cat. It's super distracting. It's super distracting. I'm trying to give you a serious, like, cutting criticism here, and you're playing with your pussy.
I'm not playing. I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't die when it chews on the computer cord.
You can tell Tim loves his cats. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't die. Yeah. So the boyfriend sacrifices himself, and he tries to stand off, and like again we get this over the top scene where the demon like stops the bullets in midair and spins them around like Magneto, and then shoots the guy back, and then the guy before they can possess him shoots himself in the head, and I'm like, am I supposed to care? Like the girlfriend's in this like vent, like screaming, like, "No, hey, I love you." No, I'm like, I don't care. It doesn't help that this guy looked like a douchebag the entire movie with this ridiculously dyed blonde hair that looked out of place. Oh, thoughts?
No, yeah, it was awful. There was never like any point I really felt anything about any of these characters or cared what happened to them.
I think they wanted us to try. Like, I think early on when they've got the girl and they're trying to make the kidnap video to like send to their parents, like Hazel looks like hi cat. Hazel crouches down next to Catherine and says, "Look, there's no bullets in this gun. This is all for show. We just want to like get money from your dad. We don't have to hurt you. We don't want to hurt you." I think that's supposed to make us sympathise with her because she's not that bad a person.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really work because I don't know. Again, we're never given a reason to see why are they in this position where they need to do this. And it's like, okay, the boyfriend has a court date, but he's got a court date because he's already been an asshole. He's already done something wrong. Like, you know, when you watch Don't Breathe and you're rooting for the main character because her little sister, like, she's got an abusive set of parents who like abuse her little sister. She wants to take her little sister away. So even though she's doing something wrong, you root for the character. She has a fairly noble reason for doing what she's doing. You watch The Collector. He's a criminal trying to break into the house to steal stuff, but he's doing it because he knows he owes money for his daughter and he's trying to stay with his daughter. So even though he's got himself in that position, you at least get the humanity behind the choice.
Yeah.
You don't get any of that.
No, like, yeah, with those other movies, like the Don't Breathe, I think was the biggest one that, like, you know, stood out to me in my mind. But it's just crazy how much better they are with like making you feel for the characters and just these like really quick little scenes. Like, you know, in the beginning, you know, the first like 10-15 minutes of that movie, you get to know like so much about them. But whereas
that's kind of the point though. It takes like 15 minutes before we get to the house and Don't Breathe. Whereas here, we're at the house within 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like, imagine if Don't Breathe started with them getting into the house, if that was the first scene.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sure, some of it would still be effective because it's well shot and whatever, but you would lose a lot of the character stuff.
Yeah.
You really, really would. So, hey. So I want to talk about the main plot. So they basically, when they go back to the house and they find out the parents are already dead and there's other dead bodies in the house, they bring back this little video camera tape and they watch it, and the girl's made this diary because she's like basically been recording that something creepy's went on and she's documenting what's happening, and it's like the start of the possession, and then I guess the parents filmed when like the exorcist came over to try and like fix her. And the exorcist was a pretty bad actor actually as well, now that I'm talking about him. But I actually like the ideas behind this stuff. I kind of like the idea that they find these tapes. It kind of reminded me of like a survival horror video game where you find like the notes and stuff explaining what the backstory is. I kind of like that. What I didn't like is A, that the acting in it was quite bad. B, that it was over the top with all the floating knives and stuff. And I also didn't like that it was all in one big clump in the middle. It was this giant exposition dump that explained the entire plot. And it was only in this chunk where they tried to explain as well, oh yeah, the house is important. Look, it's anyone who's into that house and they've got baggage, this happens to them. They're at risk of being possessed.
Yeah, see, this is probably my favorite part of the movie, which, I mean, makes it sound weird, like, because it's not like I super enjoyed it, but at least when I was watching this, I thought, like, oh, here's some interesting stuff, but it feels so out of place. Like, why is this just all of a sudden in the middle of the movie? This feels like important establishing information. Well,
I don't think it should all be at the start either. I think what would make this more interesting is if it was split up throughout the movie. Like, have the characters watch it in the middle of their story, sure, or towards the end of their story, but we see it as the audience, like we'll see a bit of it at the start, like intercut it throughout or something like that to like spread it out and make it interesting, so that each time we learn a little bit more and we're piecing it together as the main like timeline of the movie's unfolding. Like that would be a way of doing it, and that could have made it more interesting, because as it is in this movie, it's all this big dump in one go. Like the characters sit down for like 15 minutes and watch all these tapes.
Yeah, it almost feels like oh yeah, we're in like a different movie for a second.
And I get that I complained that the rest of the movie's boring as shit, but it does, assuming the rest of the movie was good, this would bring the entire movie to a grinding halt, because everything stops while they watch these tapes. And it's just this real structural thing, even though in a weird way, because the rest of the movie's so shit and at least this part had some good ideas, I like this bit more. So I was kind of wanting it to never end, and then unfortunately it did end, and then we went back to the same shite as before, which is unfortunate. But that was kind of the main thing, because they set up these ideas, and this is where I thought it got too explainy as well, a little bit. The priest, the exorcist in the videos, he seemed to know far too much about this demon and what the rules were. Oh, it needs 4 people and then it can break out of hell and walk the earth. He's like ultra specific. Here's exactly what's happening. And I know I always talk about supernatural movies. I like them to have rules, and I do like them to have rules. But this was just way too easy. This guy just happened to know all this. It felt like it was information that was too easy to have, because he just happens to know it all, and it made it feel less intimidating, because it was so strictly this. There was no like hints, which is why I'm saying this movie should have been more psychological, because I feel like if you play with the idea that there's something maybe going on, as opposed to having these shitty jump scares of like ghosts jumping at them, like if you play with the idea that she's messing with our minds and we're not really sure, like that could be really interesting, and then you intersplice it with these like videotapes of like what happened to the girl, like building up to it. Like you could have some interesting stuff going on there. I feel like you could make a good movie out of the core ideas of this.
Yeah, like I mean, what you're describing definitely sounds, and it's funny because you just watched this a little bit ago. I watched it last night, but so it's not like we've had a ton of time to think about it. But already, what you're describing sounds like that could have like vastly improved the movie, and then and that's just like after a couple of minutes, an hour, or whatever of thinking about it.
Well, I watched another movie after this, which I like much more. I watched Coherence, which is a really inventive little low-budget movie, which is purely psychological, actually, that I'm talking about it. It's about alternate timelines and realities, and it's a really fun movie. It's all set in one house. Nicholas Brendan's in it from Buffy, if you know him. And they, like, as a comet's passing by over the house, basically they get in this sort of weird thing where, like, reality's kind of acting funny, and like it's really inventive. It's kind of like it would go great as a double feature with something like Primer or even Time Crimes. Like it would go well with those.
Love Time Crimes.
In that case, I recommend.
Sounds good. I recommend to check that out.
I recommend it. Clearly, I want to talk about that much more than I do this, because that was a much better movie, which gave me a lot more to chew on. It was really inventive, which is what I really appreciate. It's not as dry as Primer though, because Primers are really, like, some people describe that as a textbook. Like it's so dry. Like it's really smart, but it's really like dry to watch. Whereas I would say Coherence was a lot more entertaining and easier to watch, whilst also having the fun playing around with stuff kind of element to it. Cool. But I do recommend it. But back to From House in Willow Street, unfortunately.
I mean, I don't know if you're gonna bring this up, but I really didn't like the setting for most of the movie. Like this dank, gross kind of warehouse. It just seemed very bland. Nothing was like that interesting. As opposed to like again, maybe I'm still thinking a bit too much about The Void that we watched last week, but just I don't know, everything I liked about that, like I liked the setting, and then how it kind of like had these otherworldly kind of aspects to it, whereas this just felt like this is just a crappy warehouse.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you can't really fault it for not having the other world elements, because that's maybe just not a part of because that was part of the plot in The Void. We can't really compare that to this. I have no.
I can.
Well, no, you can't really though.
Well, I can. I just did.
But you didn't. It doesn't work.
Well, I can still do it even if it doesn't work.
Doesn't work. You can't just say, "Oh, this location would be much more interesting if like they had like a demon version of it in the second half." Like,
Sounds good to me.
no, because I actually think a big part of the problem with this movie though is, as I mentioned, the CG stuff, because they had this like CG snake that came out of her mouth like in the second half, and then the other people that get possessed all have these CG snakes coming out of their mouth, and I actually thought it went too far. I thought The Void was a movie that went into like these like wacky ideas and like these big, super like big cosmic ideas, right? This movie, it felt like it was going too far with these CG snakes, and it was setting things too straight. It was saying, no, this is definitely what's happening, this is definitely what's going on, and this is definitely how you defeat it. And there was no ambiguity, there was no creepiness to it, because, and that's why I'm saying if it was more psychological and we weren't sure if the girl was causing this, maybe if we weren't sure that this was going on, but instead of doing something that was like a build of tension and paranoia, at the end of the movie, it is literally her and the two other possessed guys with CG snakes coming out of their mouths, chasing them, and then stopping bullets in midair and flipping them around. Like, it goes full on, like, uber schlock. And I don't think this movie benefits, or this story benefits from going uber schlock.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of where those, like, snakes or tentacles or whatever that were coming out of their mouths. It reminded me of, like, a game. I was trying to think of what it was.
I don't know, maybe Resident Evil 5? Maybe?
I was thinking one of the Resident Evils, because it's been a long time since I've played, like, 4 or 5, and I forget, in 4, was there some weird thing where, like, sometimes, like, when you shoot their heads at something would come out? Or...
Yeah, there was like it wasn't quite a snake, though, it was more of like a large arm with a claw at the end, kind of thing.
Oh, right. Yeah. I don't know, maybe I was thinking of something like that. I don't know. A lot of it kind of seemed very video gamey to me. There's at one point where like the possessed girl, she's holding up, two of those people like just like in the air.
Yeah, with telekinesis again. Yes.
Yeah, and I don't know. For some reason, it just reminded me of like I don't know. I feel like this is like I'm watching a Mortal Kombat fatality from like PS3 or something.
Yeah, I don't know. It had no subtlety. It had no. There was no real atmosphere. It was like, yeah, it was dark and it was moody. At least in the sense that they had like these moody locations and like they lit it sort of moody, but you never really felt it because you never really felt it was going on. And like I say, it kind of ignores the girl after like a couple of scenes with her at the start. You forget she's there because they're just creeping around and weird stuff's popping up at them. And then, sure, at the end, she comes back into it with her superpowers and she's like chasing them down, but that's basically all that amounts to.
And now, did I miss something?
Probably.
And I mean, I'll totally cop to it because there were times when my mind would wander during this movie, but was there a reason why, like, when she has that, like, collar, that they strap on her, does that, like, negate her powers? Or something.
What, you mean the collar just happened to put on her to lock her up?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, because it seemed like she, like, once like she got the collar off, it seemed like, she was like, oh, now I'm in like, it was really gonna mess you up. And then they tried to put it back on her, like that was gonna help. Her.
See, they explain why she's getting more powerful. She's getting more. The more people she possesses, the demon possesses, the more powerful it gets.
Okay.
So it was like once it possessed the other two, that's why it became so super like. Bullet time stoppy like superpowers. That's why it became like that. I don't think the collar actually. I think them putting the collar back on was just them trying to recontain her without understanding that she was now like superhuman.
All right.
I think it was that simple. I can I mean Hazel wins at the end by burning her and burning the others, and also her like burned mother who died in a fire. Like her ghost comes and helps and like burns the others. Which came out of nowhere as well, for reasons I can't begin to.
Why was her ghost so much more helpful than?
Because well, I guess it was actually the ghost, whereas the other ones it was projections of like the other stuff. I don't know, but I think because their mother died in that house, because this is the weird thing. Like halfway through the movie, just on the tape, the girl says, "Oh, it's this house. Whoever moves out of this house, like this thing connects to," and it's like, all right, so now you're making the house important, but it feels like the first half of the movie doesn't build to that at all. It's really weird. Even though we know it will, because the title's, you know, From a House in Willow Street, but and why is it connected to the house? It doesn't seem like the house is that important now that it's out. Like now it's with her outside the house. It just seems to be with the girl now.
No idea.
It's just I don't know. It feels so. It feels like a movie that is poorly thought out, but for some reason they decided to like specifically give you all the exposition and explain everything, and as a result, it just feels like there's no mystery to it.
Yeah.
There's a balance. There's a very fine line of balance where I like rules and supernatural stuff because I don't like them to feel like they can just do anything. Which, by the way, she did feel like she could do just anything, pretty much.
Oh yeah.
With the exception of the fact that if you start killing the people she's in, it'll reduce her power. Like, because they can die, and she gets burned at the end. And yeah, good girl wins, I guess. Well, kind of good girl. Everyone else is dead, but who gives a shit? I don't know. I found it very hard to care. The scares weren't very. No, it wasn't even that they weren't very good. They were just shit. They were flat out shit. There was no pacing. The exposition dump was weird. Even though there was good ideas behind the exposition, it was poorly executed.
I did not pee my pants once during this movie, so you know that it wasn't very good.
That's the ratings, Tim. What would you give this out of 10?
I'm not even gonna really say that I was like back and forth with this one. I think I know what I'm gonna give it. That's gonna be a 3.5.
Okay. So much build. I'm not gonna say this. I know what I'm gonna give it. I'm like, well, good. Let's get to it. All right, 3.5. I'm going 3. It's not as bad as the Bye Bye Man or Is It Watches. It's not as bad as those.
But they would probably like all hang out at the same party.
Possibly, but I think the point is though is that at least there's some good ideas in there. Like I can see like what could have been like from there. I can see the conception of a good idea. It's just I don't think the director, the writer, whoever like knew what to do with it. I think both the script and the direction's quite bad, and some of the acting's really bad. Yeah. So unfortunately, it is a bit of a damp squib of a movie. I cannot recommend From a House on Willow Street. So
it should have stayed on Willow Street. That's what I say.
But watch Coherence. It's not a horror movie, of course, but I highly recommend a nice low budget kind of lo-fi sci-fi movie called Coherence. I recommend that one though. But there you go. That's From a House in Willow Street. Let us know what you thought of it if you've seen it in the comments below. Like and subscribe and all that stuff helps us out a lot. Get us on Twitter at mild_fuzz for channel updates. Individual Twitters, I'm at Wibble89, Tim's at Tim Vergulish. You can get us on there if you want to ask us questions or just hear us ramble about various things. But that's us, guys. So thank you very much for watching. Keep watching scary movies, and we'll see you next time.